Hello, everyone. My name is Robert Gregory, and I'm the Director of Public Affairs with the Australian Jewish Association. Now, as we know, the Holocaust was a very unique event, and sometimes it's not helpful to make comparisons between different sufferings. That said, the Jewish people take very seriously the message of never again, and our duty to stand up for people facing religious, racial, or ethnic persecution. Perhaps the greatest such example today is the plight of the Uyghurs under the hands of the Chinese Communist Party. The Australian Jewish Association has been a leading Jewish group in Australia on this issue. Myself and AJA President Dr. David Adler have both written newspaper articles, we've had Uyghur guest speakers, we've made submissions to the Australian government, spoken at rallies, and worked to raise awareness. Now, it's an honor to speak to my guest today. Salih Hudayar is the Prime Minister of the East Turkestan government in exile. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me.
Now, let's start. Can you describe, in your own words, what's happening to your people?
Well, what's happening to the people of East Turkestan, specifically the Uyghur and other Turkic peoples, is nothing less than a wholesale genocide in the 21st century. Since China occupied East Turkestan in late 1949, it has been engaging in a brutal campaign of colonization, assimilation, and occupation that has proliferated to genocide under the reign of Xi Jinping, starting around 2014 with the mass internment of initially hundreds of thousands of young men between the ages of 15 and 45, and then starting around 2016 to the entire population of Uyghur and other Turkic peoples, with the U.S. Department of Defense estimating that at least 3 million Uyghurs, Kazakhs, Kyrgyz, and other Turkic peoples have been taken into concentration camps and prisons for so-called re-education. But what is essentially happening is that in these camps, people are being subject to all types of tortures and crimes against humanity, including forced medication, torture, forced sterilization, rape, organ harvesting, summary execution, medical experimentation, all of these in addition to forced and slave labor. Outside of East Turkestan, outside of the camps and prisons in East Turkestan, all of East Turkestan has effectively been turned into essentially a ghetto where Uyghurs are locked up without even being able to freely travel from one part of town to another part of town without special permission from the Chinese government. You have Chinese government minders who have been officially paired up as what the Chinese government officially describes as a relatives program to live in the homes of Uyghurs, to monitor their day-to-day activities, and to essentially assess their, quote, loyalty to the Chinese state. Then on top of that, you have over 890,000 Uyghur and other Turkic children that have been taken into, that have been forcibly separated from their families and taken into essentially indoctrination camps for children, where they are being brainwashed and indoctrinated to become so-called loyal Chinese citizens and taught to despise their own ethno, religious, and national identity. You have the forced marriages of Uyghur and other Turkic women, which is essentially a state-sponsored form of rape to essentially breed out the Uyghur and other Turkic populations. And all of these are just barely scratching the surface of what's the atrocity that is really happening on the ground as we are already in the halfway of 2023.
So some of those things that you've mentioned, slave labor, medical experimentation, concentration camps, they're very familiar to the Jewish people. Other things that I've heard reports of, tons of Uyghur hair for sale, bans on religious Uyghurs having beards, things that are certainly very familiar to the Jewish people. So have you received much support from Jews around the world, Jewish organizations? What's been your experience there?
Yes, in fact, it was the Jewish organizations and Jewish individuals across the world, here in the United States and Europe and other places, that were the first to, show solidarity with us. In fact, you had Jewish organizations and individuals protesting against the ongoing genocide before many Uyghurs themselves had the courage to protest against it. So we are truly grateful for the Jewish communities and individuals across the world who have stood with us in our darkest moment to oppose this genocide. They have contributed to, not only raising awareness, but also, helping us in terms of spreading advocacy and getting legislations passed, whether it's here in the United States Congress or across the world in the UK and the EU Parliament and other places.
Yeah, it's very important. And obviously, we're happy to help out in any way we can in Australia as well, if we can be of assistance. Another question I wanted to ask you was, I know that Uyghur Australians have condemned many Muslim majority nations, particularly in the UN Human Rights Council, for voting down debates on what's going on. Can you comment on the Islamic world's response, on Islamic countries? How have they responded?
Yes, unfortunately, majority of the Muslim world and the Islamic world is utterly silent against the China's ongoing genocide in East Turkestan. Yet, when you hear about Quran burnings in other places, or even other things that are offensive to Muslims, you have the international Muslim world rising up in protest. Yet China has destroyed over 16,000 mosques across East Turkestan. They've burned millions of Islamic texts and scriptures. Yet there's not even a single outcry from a single Muslim country, let alone a single distinguished Muslim organization. On top of that, not only are the Muslim countries silent, many of them are complicit in the Uyghur genocide. Many of them are, have deported their Uyghur diaspora populations to China, knowing that they're going to be sent into Chinese concentration camps and prisons. You have wealthy Muslims across from the Muslim world visiting China to, buy so-called halal organs. And these so-called halal organs are being extracted from Uyghur and other Turkic prisoners on demand. And so many Muslim countries are unfortunately complicit in the ongoing genocide of our people. And this is something that is not only against the Islamic faith. They're not only betraying their Islamic faith, but they're just betraying the very values of humanity itself.
Why do you think that is? Do you have any theories about what's behind that?
Well, there's two reasons. One, primarily, unfortunately, is because of economic reasons. Many of the Muslim countries are heavily indebted to China in terms of, and intertwined in terms of their economic relations. Then there's also the political reason, which is China has been effectively using the Palestinian cause to sway, or using its so-called support for the Palestinian cause to sway the Muslim majority countries to view China more favorably, because of China is criticizing Israel over the Palestinian issue. Many Muslim countries think that, oh, China is friendly to the Muslims, when in reality, China is engaging in genocide and engaging in war against Islam at the greatest level.
And I can add to that an anecdote that happened to us here. We attended an event with a diplomat from a Muslim country, which I won't name, and we posted a picture to our social media, and it was about an unrelated atrocity that was going on. And in the text, we said, we speak up on this issue, and we also speak up on the issue of the Uyghurs. And I was contacted by this diplomat who said, take down this photo immediately. We can't be tagged in it. We can't be associated with a post that which was on the Australian Jewish Association social media that's criticizing China. So that was our experience with that. So you mentioned the Palestinians, and I wanted to bring that up because something that particularly bothered me was a recent visit that many of our viewers may have seen of Palestinian Authority President Mahmoud Abbas to China. Now, we know Mahmoud Abbas because he actually earned his PhD in a thesis denying the Holocaust. So it's a bit of history with these issues. And I'll quote from him. He said, "Issues regarding China's policy towards Muslims in Xinjiang have nothing to do with human rights and are aimed at excising extremism and opposing terrorism and separatism. Palestine resolutely opposes using the Xinjiang problem as a way of interfering in China's internal affairs." So I'll ask you two questions. First of all, to comment on the allegations about extremism and terrorism that he's raising, and also have you received much support from Palestinian Arabs around the world?
In terms of the first question, I mean, China has been using the the false pretext of so-called terrorism, separatism, and extremism, especially post 9/11, to crack down on Uyghurs. So they equate, for example, in China's eyes, anyone advocating for East Turkestan's independence or advocating for any political rights is viewed as a terrorist, whether they are violent or non-violent. In fact, there has been no terrorist activities carried out whatsoever. So this is baseless. As for extremism, anyone who practices any form of religion, and whether that's Islam, Buddhism, or any other religion that the Chinese government does not sanction, if it steps out of line out of what the Chinese government, dictates, the perverted version of those religions, then that's viewed as a form of extremism. Having, a little bit of facial hair is deemed as extremism by the Chinese government. If anything, the Chinese government are the terrorists and extremists. As for separatism, East Turkestan is not, a part of China. If you look at historical maps, you can always see that East Turkestan has always been a different, unique, independent, separate country. Up until 1949, East Turkestan wasn't a part of China. After 1949, it got occupied. We've had a long history of independence with a long, distinct culture, history, and language and other backgrounds. We're not advocating for the separation of China. We're not advocating for the separation of Beijing or some Chinese province. We're an occupied nation advocating for the restoration of our independence, like any other, country, just like how Ukraine is, struggling to fight for its freedom against Russian invasion and aggression. As far as this second question, unfortunately, no, we have not seen any support from any Palestinians. In fact, on the contrary, you always see Palestinian organizations or, entities like the Palestinian Authority siding with China. Repeatedly at the United Nations, they voted against numerous, letters by coalition groups, mostly Western countries, that were trying to raise our issue at the UN. Palestine was one of those countries that signed onto a joint letter issued by China to counter that. More recently, they visited China and essentially, threw East Turkestan under the bus, showing how hypocritical they are, really, also as well as showing the fact that, for the Chinese, the Palestinian issue is just a game to use as leverage against Israel, but also to use as leverage to deceive the majority of the Muslim world into supporting China's claims and its atrocities in East Turkestan.
And for the record, I've met many people from your community, and I've never seen the slightest bit of extremism, so that counts for anything. But the last question I wanted to ask you is the current Australian government doing enough, and what can people in the West do to help?
Unfortunately, no. We haven't had much luck with the Australian government. The Australian government, despite all the threat and pressure that it's receiving from China, it's not doing enough to, push back against China's aggression, whether it's against Australia in itself or whether it's against the ongoing genocide against Uyghurs and other Turkic peoples in East Turkestan. We hope that the very first thing that Australia will do is, at the very least, recognize the ongoing genocide in East Turkestan, like the United States and the parliaments of over a dozen countries, including Canada and many European countries. But also, we hope that Australia will, take a more active role in uplifting the rights of Uyghurs and other peoples, especially in the diaspora. And we hope that, Australia will use its voice at the UN and other international bodies to actively champion the plight of the Uyghur and other Turkic peoples in East Turkestan.
Well, thank you. And we certainly hope the Australian government does more. We have our own issues with them, but we're happy to help out in any way we can. And it's a really important cause that everyone should be behind, particularly the Australian government, because it does or it should understand what we're facing in China with our own issues there. So I really want to thank you so much for joining me today. Salih Hudayar, the Prime Minister of the East Turkestan government in exile. It's been a real honor to have you here. I hope we hear good news for your people, independence for your nation, hopefully establish ties with Israel. It's something we can look forward to. So we wish you all the best, and we're going to keep advocating for you. So thank you again for joining me.
Thank you, and God bless.